All right. Well, Eva, thank you so much for hopping on the podcast. I'm super excited to have you here and to dive in a little bit today about perfectionism and why it's a topic we need to talk about in terms of motherhood. So thanks so much for hopping on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Before we dive all in and get to the nitty gritty and juicy details, would you mind just sharing a little bit about you?
Yeah, sure. So I am a clinical psychologist and I have been specializing in child development as well as a child and parent relationship for many years. And I have since specialized in perfectionism, which is a form of anxiety, because I find that it really permeates a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of parent child relationship issues, and a lot of issues with motherhood.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been just such a journey to be able to help the parents and the kids that I see, and also for myself, because I consider myself a recovering perfectionist.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I'm in the same boat. I kind of see myself as a recovering perfectionist too. So, okay, so before we dive in, and I'm super excited about this topic because, like I told you beforehand, I don't think that it's really something that we've talked a lot about, and I think it has many different layers, and it can go in many different ways. So we'll see where this conversation goes. But
Awesome.
before we kick it off, how would you describe perfectionism? Like, what does it look like? How does it show up in mom life?
Yeah. So perfectionism can be a good and a bad thing. It's not all bad or all good, right? Because
Mhm.
it's when it becomes to the extreme that it becomes difficult for mothers to manage. You know, there's a lot of pressure on us from society to be this perfect mom, from social media, from our friends, from what we think our moms did growing up, that a
Mhm.
lot of us feel this intense pressure to keep everything perfect, to be the mom who's always there for the children, to have all the outfits picked out, to have the Pinterest perfect parties and the Pinterest perfect house. And it's exhausting because we want to do it all with a smile on our face and not be tired. And that's not reality.
Yeah.
So perfectionism can become difficult and kind of scary when we grasp onto this fantasy versus the reality of what life is really supposed to be about.
Mm, I love that. And I think it's so true. It's kind of like those expectations, right? And like the difference
Yeah.
between what our expectations are and what reality is. So, how do you see perfectionism like show up on the day to day? What does that like, how does it manifest? Like, what are like, so if there's a mom listening and kind of tuning in, and for a while, it took me a really long time to realize that I was a perfectionist because I felt like I wasn't. I was one of those people. I take action really quickly. I do things. It's okay if it's not perfect, if it's messy. But then over time, I realized like all of these subtle little pieces were ways that I was showing up in a way that was like trying to achieve that perfection. So what ways have you seen it in that way, kind of showing up in mom life?
Yeah, so perfectionism, I feel like it's this like pesky little inner critic that takes up space from the minute you wake up to, oh my gosh, I woke up 5 minutes too late. I should have been doing this. I could have been doing that. Or let me go and make sure that everything's okay and ready for breakfast and lunch and dinner. To, oh my God, I need to tell my husband or my partner that he needs to do X, Y, and Z because if he doesn't do it, then it's not going to be good. And if he does do it and I'm not there to be on top of it, and it's like all this really rapid
Yeah.
speech kind of going monologue going on in your mind that you think that you are supposed to be in control at all times to make sure that things flow in the way that you think that they need to flow.
Yeah.
And a lot of future tripping, a lot of wanting to plan out how everything will go, because in that way, you think everything will be smooth.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the mentality of that, you know, starting from the morning and then at night rehearsing and reviewing the day's events and how you could have done things different and how it could have been better and what you should have said and what you should not have said instead. And you know, that kind of is like a flare of like the overthinking, overanalyzing, wanting to redo that you said that
Mm-hmm.
you didn't do. And even, you know, even though you consider yourself a perfectionist, it's kind of one area. I think the other area too that I kind of just touched upon is feeling this really strong need to tell other people what to do and how to do it
Mm-hmm.
because that's the perfect way, because you're
Mm-hmm.
trying to help,
Yeah.
because you've done the research, you've read the books, you've seen, you've talked to the doctors, to the teachers, to everyone that you need to speak to.
Yeah.
And just having this need to make sure everything's organized. Like I tell my clients, I know that something's up when I go and color coordinate my closet even more than it already is. When I start reorganizing things more, there's something that I'm avoiding that I'm taking it out on the clothes in my closet, just to give an example.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny you bring that up because even last night I was like loading the dishes. I had family over, and so my aunt was helping load my dishwasher. And so as I was putting stuff in the dishwasher after she left, I was like, oh gosh, she loads her dishwasher differently than I do. And so it had me have this question of like, is there that perfect way to load the dishwasher? And I know that in the past I've posted random things like that on social media and had people say like, you know, their spouse doesn't load the dishwasher the right way, so it's better that they'll just do it instead, right? So what are some of those like big, I guess, roadblocks that you see by holding on to that perfection? Like what is it costing by holding on to that? Like in that scenario, I guess, in a sense, you never allow people to help, right?
Right.
You're not willing to let your kids try it and mess up, or your spouse to do it and maybe it not be perfect, because we're trying to hold on to that perfect way because we think it's the most efficient and the most easy. Like what are those long-term ramifications of kind of staying in that spot of like, I'll just take care of it, I'll just do it?
Right. So there's so many. First of all, starting with the individual, starting with the mom, when she has that belief system that she should take care of it and she should take care of it all. And this was her choice to have a family, so she's responsible. And this was her choice to have the dinner party, so she's responsible. It wears on her. It's exhausting and it's very lonely. It's very lonely because at the end of the day, we all do need support in one way or another. I mean, that's why COVID has been actually hitting so many people so hard, because the social interaction, the piece of the social network of support was shaken up so much. And it really shows us how much we do need that connection. But when we are ashamed to ask for help, not only do we feel lonely because we feel like it's all on us, but then we're also shamed for needing something that's a very human, normal thing to need. And it creates it creates a lot of relationship issues, because if you think that it's wrong to need and it's wrong to ask for help, that and you're always the one helping, the one in the receiving end might kind of feel their own way about it, especially if it's the spouse, right? If it's a child, it's a different scenario, but the spouse might feel like this is a very one-sided relationship, as much as mom would, or the partner for that matter, because if it's only the mom's way, then it's okay, but the other way doesn't work. So it creates a lot of, I think, relationship issues between the parents or whatever, because it always has to be her way, because that's supposedly, quote unquote, the right way.
Yeah.
And
Well, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Well, I'll move on to the kids in a minute.
I was just going to say something that you highlighted that I really love is kind of just flipping that script on that description. And it's like asking for help is actually a basic human need, right? Like we need, like as human beings, we need, like you said, that connection with other people. We need that reciprocity, if that's the right way to say that, like that reciprocal, like interaction with people. Like that's a basic human need. And so I really loved the way you framed that and taking that shame off of asking for help and looking at it like, no, this is a part of being a human being, is that we do this. We go this back and forth, give and take sort of process with other people is a part of who we are as people. It doesn't mean that we're any less or we're performing any less or we're not doing it well or any of that kind of thing. That's just like a basic foundation of who we are as human beings. And I really loved the way you said that. And I think that kind of just like going into it, how that expectation of like it has to be done a certain way has impacts on our relationships with our kids. And so I would love for you to dive into, or your spouse or your friends or whoever, right? Like it just impacts, it has these ripple effects. So I would love for you to unpack that a little bit in terms of how is it actually when we are in this dynamic, in this relationship of always expecting it to be done a certain way, or like, or hands off, like not allowing them to help at all. Like, how does that impact that relationship long term?
So definitely, with the kids, for example, if we are always thinking that it has to be our way, then we are completely severing their unique development. We're cutting that off because we're essentially saying, if it's not my way or what I think is good or comfortable or whatever, then it's wrong and cannot exist.
Right.
And what happens, as it always usually does, we have children who trigger us because they are triggering parts of us that we need to resolve. And so, how often do you have the super clean freak mom who has a super messy, out of it child who's, driving her up the wall, and she's frantic about it because it's parts of her that she needs to deal with. She has to make amends with the fact that it doesn't always have to be super pristine and neat. And so what does that do to the child as he or she's developing her personality, her sense of self? If the clear message is it's only okay if you show certain parts of yourself, how does that feel to the child? It's a big feeling of rejection. It creates a lot of inauthenticity, of people pleasing, wanting to be then the good girl, the good boy. And then we realize later on in life that, well, that's not exactly who they really were or want to be. And we have other issues that come up later on. So, and even actually, not even later on, even in the moment of, right, we have a lot of behavioral issues going on because there's the parent struggles or the power struggles with the parent, or the very much anxious, people-pleasing child that really don't get mad at me, mommy, please, it's okay, or maybe sneaking off and doing things off to the side because they're so afraid that what they're doing is going to really bother the parent. And we're singling out moms here, right? Because it's just, we're talking about moms, but this is also very much in fathers as well, or this is not like a specific mom thing.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that that's super powerful because, it's kind of like I want to look at my kids as being that they are standing on my shoulders going further and farther than me, right? Like that idea of that they are going to evolve and create things beyond what I was ever able to do. And so if I'm holding them in that box of what my limits of what I thought was right or how I thought it should be done, it's almost like stunting that evolution of like what could be possible in the future, like what could they create and those individual human beings that they're going to evolve and become, right? And so I think it is really powerful to look at that they are individual human beings, and it's our role to help foster that and to grow that, and that will probably come up very contradictory to the ways and the things that we've done in the past.
But even what you just said, that's a desire that you have, that you want them to surpass you. That's coming out of something that you want. And it could be that happens with your children, and it could be that something else happens. It's a desire that you have that propels you, I'm sure, to offer them a lot of different opportunities and different experiences. But what they then end up doing with that's their journey, that's on them.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. And I remember this kind of goes back to somebody, like when I was a new mom, she had said, one of the greatest gifts of advice I can give you is that moment that you can realize that you don't have control over your kids is one of the moments that you receive the greatest freedom, in that same idea of that you can help shape and change them, but they are on their own journey, that you cannot control them. They are their own unique human beings in that. Yeah. So
go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go. We're just having a good conversation.
So I think it's such good advice, although I think it gets kind of lost in the waters when we're talking about specifics, like for the little ones when you're choosing a preschool, or when they're leaving preschool and going into kindergarten, or when your daughter starts going into puberty, or your son starts making different friends, or just different things all around where you want to control because you see how things can turn out, but
Yeah.
holding back from that can be really challenging, because
Yeah.
you want what's best for your child. And I think that's why perfectionism is hard to pinpoint, because in the mind of the parent, as a parent, I'm doing what's best.
Yeah.
I'm thinking ahead. I'm thinking ahead to save you, to protect you. and
Mm-hmm.
and there's always that justification of, well, this is why I'm being controlling. Not to
Yeah.
say that no control, because you are the authority as a parent, but to what extent?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. And I think that that goes really like into a nice segue into, so what do we do, right? Like, how do we either let go of those expectations or let go of some of that control, let go of any of that fear? I think fear probably comes up in that a lot too, right? Like that's probably a lot of where that perfection and control comes from, is from that sense of fear of the what if something comes down the road, or like you said, that like they make the friends or they make wrong choices, or like all of that kind of stuff. Like, how do we move forward? Like, how do we let go of some of this perfectionism? And what is the alternative? Like, what does, like, do we ever become a recovered perfectionist, or is it always this evolution? There was a lot of questions thrown
Yeah.
at you all in one time right there.
No, it's perfect. So, I always tell my clients, you're never going to turn into this free-spirited hippie living on the desert. Like, that's not, and maybe if you do, you'll have like the most perfectly beautiful, organized tent out there. So it's not that you're going to change from a type A to a type B personality, in another way of putting it, but you will have a better grasp as to what it really means to be in relationship with the ones you love the most.
Mm,
Because part of the perfectionism is that we think as the identity is to help, to be there for the other person, because we feel so nice to be helping. So that's why we tell people what to do. That's why we keep everything organized. That's why we plan ahead, why we do the research, et cetera, because we want to feel useful. But there's a misconception in the form of usefulness when we talk about it being perfect, because of
mm-hmm.
all the drawbacks that we've talked about, that it's draining, that it's one-sided, that we're not allowing our children to develop into their own person, that we're living in fear. And
Mm-hmm.
so if we can remold that to a sense of, well, what's happening here, where I'm always telling the person what to do? What is the reaction? Is the reaction a pushback? Is the reaction talking back, ignoring, doing something else, being sneaky? It takes a lot of introspection to say, okay, I have a part in the relationship and I have a part in the reaction of the other person. A lot of times people want to say, no, it's all them. They're the ones
Yeah.
who have the behavioral problems for the child, or he's always lazy sitting on the couch, not doing anything and not helping me load the dishwasher, or this one's lying to me. But we don't take a moment to see, well, what's my role in the relationship
Mm-hmm.
that's creating part of the issue.
Yeah. And I think that's super
I,
powerful.
I don't know if I got to everything that you were saying, but it's also, just like I said to you before, when some of the perfectionism type of things start coming out again, then it's a moment to look into, okay, well, what's happening here within me, within my life, that I feel the extra need to control or to organize? Where am I feeling out of sorts, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm taking it out on my closet, or I'm taking it out on something else?
Yeah.
And again, that's a lot of introspection,
Yeah.
and taking a breath and saying, okay, what's up? What's going on?
Yeah, and I had a client of mine recently say that she has just loved kind of approaching a lot of her life from this place of curiosity and like asking those questions. Like just like you talked about, is like getting really curious about what is my role, and like just how am I reacting in this conversation, and and just having those, like asking more and more questions and like being curious about why things go the way they do has really shifted and changed. And I think that a lot of what you're talking about is kind of that same space of like asking and like introspection. I think it's just a different layer of words of like getting really curious about those dynamics in your relationship. And something you said about like the type A versus type B person, and I wanted to kind of just, this probably should have been something we asked at the beginning, was do you feel like that perfectionism and the sense of control does it impact all moms, or is it something that you think that some moms don't struggle with perfectionism at all? Or is it, like, I know like that type A personality gets that stereotype that that's where they're at.
Yeah.
So there might be some moms listening to this being like, I'm totally a type B person. Perfectionism isn't something that I struggle with. Like, is that true? Or do you see that perfectionism has its play in other ways?
I do think that perfectionism affects some people, not all. And
Okay.
again, it's not that perfectionism is all in all a bad thing. It's to the extent that it negatively impacts your life and your relationships, that then it becomes troublesome. But in order to succeed in anything, you need to have a certain level of perfectionism. Doctors have to be very, very good at what they do when they're performing surgery. They can't
Mm-hmm.
just do it off on the fly, right? And in the same way as you're getting better and better at a skill, or if you're playing a sport, there is a level of practice. So there is a finesse to everything, that it has to be as close to perfect as possible to get it to where it has to go.
Yeah.
But when that negatively impacts or takes over your thoughts and the enjoyment or lack thereof, for better said,
Mm-hmm.
of life, then we're looking at, okay, well, what's, like you said, what's the expectation? What's the reality? What's happening
Right.
here that there's this huge disconnect? And I think a lot of times, going back to what you were saying about introspection, sometimes it can be a little tricky because perfectionists can be so hard on themselves. As
Yeah.
much as we like to give advice, we also take things so personally when there's a problem. Oh, I must have done something wrong. That's why they're angry.
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure everyone's happy.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times it's having that curiosity, but trying to reduce the judgment. So
Yeah.
keeping up with the judgment, and also keeping and tapping into the feeling. What am I feeling right now? Because everything's not perfect, but I'm feeling a certain way, and I need to deal with this feeling because I don't like it. It's uncomfortable. It's not perfect. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a combination of the introspection of the brain, of the mind, and also really connecting to your heart, and then also to your intuition. Some things we just sense it and we
Yeah.
know something's up, but we can't put our finger on it.
Yeah. No, I love that 100%. I think it's super important because I think you are correct in that sense of like me. I look at like as a perfectionist, I'm running through that thought all the time. And that connection to what my heart and my body is feeling is so incredibly valuable and important. And I think in the past, as that perfection, you're just like constantly running through that stream of thought, and like you said, judgment, you're like judging how it all went and how it happened and all these things. But that connection to your heart and that feel and like truly in your body in that sense. And that's, I think, why for me, like physical exercise and like yoga and stuff was so therapeutic, was because it was allowed some of that release. And so I think it is incredibly powerful, like you highlighted that the two have to kind of, you have to have both processing there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So, as we kind of come closer to the end, is there like one last little like strategy or tip or suggestion that you would offer somebody who's sitting there feeling like, gosh, I have so much, like I struggle with this so hard right now. This is something that I either didn't realize I had going on before, or I did, and I'm just still having a hard time with it. Like, what would that one thing be?
To
Like,
know that
totally
you
on the spot.
can't. No, it's okay. I'm just okay. How am I going to summarize all of the therapy that we do in one sentence?
Yes.
It's not about changing who you are. It's about accepting. And I think
Mm,
once you accept, then you can start to make changes. Going
yeah.
back to the non-judgment part, we are so hard on ourselves. And so for someone who's listening and she's hearing this and feeling so bad because now all of these dots are connecting, and oh my gosh, that's right, this is what I do, and oh my gosh, this whole time I can't believe it,
Yeah.
and going into a tizzy, take a moment, take a breath. It's going to be okay. You have the awareness. Let's then figure out how to make the changes, because at the end of the day, your intentions are good.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they can be tweaked a bit so that the effects of the intentions are just as good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Okay, any last little thing you feel like we didn't cover today that you feel like needs to be said?
Oh my gosh, there's probably so much. No, I think we got through some of the basics, through some of the basics. It's definitely an interesting topic. I think it's a pervasive one, and
Mm-hmm.
it's really about, like we talked about, it's that human connection. It's a need. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. There's nothing wrong with wanting to connect.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us are afraid of that intimacy, and
Mm.
it's something that we all need. We all need it.
Yeah.
We're humans. We're just, that's what it is.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, and when you mentioned that word intimacy, it kind of made me think of like that the idea of like vulnerability, and like sometimes being
yeah,
really vulnerable really puts us in that deep intimate connection, and in that space it can be scary and it can be exhilarating, it can be really revitalizing. Like there's a lot of different emotions and fears that can kind of come up with that, and I think like embracing that and moving through that piece is huge too.
definitely, if not the biggest part of the work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I have loved this conversation with you and loved connecting with you. And I know so many people listening are going to want to connect with you further. So how can they do that?
Definitely. So you guys can follow me on Facebook, Dr. Eva Benmelah Therapy. On Instagram, they're all different. Dr. Eva B Therapy. I have a Facebook group for perfectionists called Perfectionist Insight and Education. And I do Friday videos called Face the Fear Friday, where I talk about different fears perfectionists have to face.
Mm,
And you can connect with me by logging into my website, Dr. Eva Therapy. Maybe we can put it down in the
yep.
comment section afterwards
Yep.
if you'd like to schedule a session with me.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much for hopping on. This was amazing. And I do think it's something that has, like we said, so many different layers and so many different pieces to it. And it shows up in these like sneaky little ways in our life that we maybe aren't realizing it, but processing through and kind of feeling both physically and mentally, and the whole kind of holistic piece of us together is really incredibly powerful. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank
Yeah.
you.